Without Cliff Richard, there wouldn't be the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. Cliff is known as the first British rock star, and his fame spread all over the world. In 1965, people around the world voted him as the top male singer, beating even Elvis Presley. The chart was winning awards and selling millions of records, but suddenly he disappeared from being famous. What could have made this happen? Some say the music business tried to shut him up. Others say it's something deeper, painful, and heartbreaking. Now, we know what it is, okay? We're going to tell you everything. When Cliff released his first song in 1958, it was amazing. The song was called Rebellious, but what made it special was that it was British. Cliff didn't try to get famous in America, and this worked out great for him because his fans believed he was making something new. The song went to number 2 on the charts and caused what the newspapers called Cliff hysteria. The newspapers had found a new favorite and kept talking about Cliff's song. In the 1980s, radio stations weren't complete until they played his songs. Because of this, Cliff stayed popular and sold records. But when the 1990s came, things got weird. Cliff suddenly found himself having trouble staying famous in the media. There were clear attempts to remove him from talks about rock and roll. The different documentaries that told the story of British music talked about Beatles and Rolling Stones, but left out his name or his band's name. Richard thought it was strange. In 1964, when the Beatles were super popular, Cliff still had 6 top 10 hits. Paul McCartney even said the reason the Beatles went to Hamburg was because Cliff had almost completely taken over the British market. So, Richard wondered why documentaries were trying to erase him from history, but he didn't know that things hadn't even gotten worse yet. Radio stations and media companies began to call Richard's songs old. In 1998, Chris Evans, who hosted the morning show on Virgin Radio, called Richard's songs out of style and said he would never play any of Richard's songs again. Richard wasn't going to let anyone walk all over him like he was nothing. So, he began to openly complain about how the media treated him. He said he needed help from the media to stay famous because the radio play he got helped him get promoted and sell songs. However, even though he complained, nothing changed. In 2011, digital radio station Absolute Radio 60s, which played popular music from the 1960s, announced they wouldn't play any of Richard's songs. Their reason? They said that Richard's songs weren't cool. Their DJ, DJ Pete, said that Richard didn't fit with the Beatles, the Stones, the Doors, Tidge, and The Who. It was Cliff that showed other rock and rollers that it was cool to sound British in their songs. He helped British rock and roll singers create their own style. Hey, and this was what he got back. Richard defended himself, saying that anyone who didn't recognize his impact on British history or said his songs weren't cool were just lying to themselves and the public. He got support from people like author and rock music critic Tony Parsons. According to Tony, no real pop music fan wouldn't like Cliff Richard. Sting also defended Richard and called him one of Britain's best technical and emotional singers. However, the industry didn't like that Richard was getting support and took action against those who were helping him. In 2004, DJ Tony Blackburn, who worked at Classic Gold Digital, played Richard's songs on the morning show he hosted. Everything seemed fine until the head of programs, Paul Baker, sent an email to Blackburn and reminded him they had a rule that they wouldn't play Richard's songs. Blackburn was shocked, so he printed out the email. The next morning, he read the email live on air to the show's listeners and then played 2 songs by Richard. After that, Blackburn was suspended. Despite these defenses, Richard still wasn't getting radio play, and he began to wonder if recording new songs would even matter at all. He stayed away from being famous a lot, but hadn't disappeared completely. That was about to change, and love played a part. To Cliff Richard, love was very important, and he went after it whenever he could. But life always had other plans for him. Richard's first real relationship was with Australian dancer Delia Wixes. Everything seemed fine between them, and the two had been dating for 18 months. However, Richard felt pressure from both his growing career and his family. His father died in 1961, which really affected him. The two of them had gotten really close before Richard became famous. With his father's death, taking care of them, family became his job. Richard felt like he had to choose between completely focusing on his career so he could provide for his family or manage his career, provide for his family, and be with Delia. Richard believed he couldn't do all three and wrote to Delia that he could not give up his career or his family for her. He did what he believed was best and broke up with her. After his breakup with Delia, Richard dated other women, but none of his relationships lasted. In 1982, he met former French Open tennis champion Sue Barker, and they hit it off. Richard flew to watch her play, and their relationship got the media's attention when the two were later photographed cuddling and holding hands at Wimbledon. In early 1983, Richard was already thinking of marrying Sue, but later in the year, he changed his mind. Richard was already married to the showbiz life of a rock and roller, and everything else came second. Then Richard realized something. He admitted he loved Sue, but didn't love her enough to want to commit the rest of his life to her. Sue must have been hurt, but she and Richard managed to be friends when they broke up because of his attitude towards relationships. Many people began to question Richard's sexuality. Richard is very private about his life, and people concluded that Richard had to be gay, but Richard denied that he was. The entertainment industry at the time blacklisted entertainers who were gay, and to save their careers, these entertainers entered into fake relationships. Many thought Richard was doing the same thing, but Richard revealed that he wasn't, and said even if he got married, people would believe what they wanted to. Richard was really committed to his music and didn't want to enter into a marriage and raise a family he wouldn't be able to fully commit to. However, there was one woman he truly loved, Olivia Newton-John. The two became friends in the 1970s, and they began to work together. Richard fell in love with her, but he didn't act on it. And Olivia got engaged to his bandmate Bruce Welch before later marrying someone else. 4 years, Richard carried the heartbreak and never really healed. He continued to work with Olivia, and in the 1995 musical Heathcliff, she played Kathy to his Heathcliff. Richard described her as a soulmate. Every woman he met didn't measure up to Olivia. I think when she died in 2022 from breast cancer, Richard was crushed. The one woman he loved more than music died. And because of this, he stayed away from being famous so he could mourn her. Richard loved music in a way most musicians don't. He didn't see it as a way to only make money, but as a way of life. Richard loved to dazzle, and so, in the early days of his career, after that incredible first single, he was called Britain's answer to Elvis Presley. Richard played his part well and copied Elvis's flashy style. When he performed, he struck a pose of bad boy rock attitude. He didn't smile or look at the audience or camera. He changed the game for British rock and roll artists, and John Lennon, who had previously criticized British music as being unimportant, greatly respected Richard. This highly respected musician is who the media is working so hard to erase. Did Richard do anything to make the media turn against him? Richard believed the media was trying to remove him from being famous because he didn't fit the image of the typical rock star. Unlike most other musicians, Richard talked about his religion for everyone to hear and lived a life free from alcohol and drugs. So, without a lifestyle fueled by alcohol and drugs, Richard was seen as boring. People didn't connect his songs to controversy, which he claimed didn't give radio stations the motivation to play his songs. He criticized the music industry for trying to motivate artists to court controversy so they could sell records, despite the media turning on him and him not having a family of his own. Richard was never truly alone. He had friends who were always around him. He and Cilla Black were friends, and the two hung out a lot in different countries. Fortunately, Sila died in 2015. Richard has suffered the death of people that he really cared about and who didn't let him feel alone. Each death made him leave the spotlight to grieve. In 1999, his close friend, the British television presenter Jill Dando, was murdered, and Richard found her death hard to accept. As Richard dealt with these losses, his mother struggled with the loss of her own mind due to Alzheimer's disease. After her diagnosis in 1997, Richard and his sisters had found it difficult to manage their mother's condition. Seeing her forget who she was and who they were crushed him. However, despite his best efforts, Richard could only watch when his mother eventually passed away in 2007. All of these events tested Richard, but none tested him as much as what happened next. Richard loved Portugal and had been visiting the country for personal and business reasons since the 60s. He even owned a house there. Richard had a winemaking business in the country, which people found weird because they believed rock stars shouldn't have that kind of business. When he wasn't performing, Richard loved relaxing in Portugal. And in August 2014, he was enjoying the warmth of the country in his home. When he turned on the TV, he changed the channel to BBC to watch the news, and what he saw stunned him. It was his house back in the United Kingdom. The BBC was doing a live broadcast of a raid on his house based on a claim of a man who said that Richard sexually assaulted him. There were accusations that Cliff had a secret room in the house that he used to assault people, but according to Cliff, the room didn't exist. He was surprised by what he was seeing. The police were trying to avoid a Jimmy Savior situation with Richard, and so were thorough. In 2012, it was revealed that Jimmy had been sexually abusing people all his life, from kids to people as old as 75 years old, with most of his victims being female. Jimmy used his charity and influence to assault people, and the police were sure that Richard was doing the same. Richard returned to the UK and went straight to the police voluntarily for an interview. He denied the allegations. He claimed he had witnesses who could provide an alibi, but the police didn't believe him. People also didn't. Already, the media made him look like he didn't belong, and people thought he was gay. So, in the eyes of the public, Richard was a weird guy who could do anything he was accused of. The UK police continued their investigation, but didn't find anything that could lead them to arrest him. It looked like what they did was deliberate and that they wanted to completely ruin Richard's reputation to the point he wouldn't be able to release music without being seen as a sexual abuser. Richard couldn't go anywhere without bringing negative attention, and because of this, he canceled his visit to the United States to watch the US Open tennis championships. The incident shook Richard. He lost weight, developed shingles, and slipped into depression. Nothing mattered to him any more than to just clear his name. But the police were determined for him not to be able to do that. Then things got worse. A man called Richard and threatened to spread false stories about him. Richard had two choices. He could pay the man off or fight the man and risk getting false stories about him out in the public. Already, he was unpopular and the public would just believe anything against him. Richard was torn, but decided to fight the man and reported him to the police. But despite that arrest, the police doubled down on him. They weren't willing to just admit that they had made a mistake and that the accusations made against Richard were false. So, in February 2015, the police declared that the inquiry into the alleged offenses had increased and would be continuing. Richard immediately pleaded his innocence and challenged the allegations. The police still didn't find anything. A review of their actions showed that the police had breached their own protocols. Eventually, on the 16th of June 2016, the police dropped the charges against Richard. Finally, he was free, but he didn't truly feel relief. The police and BBC publicly apologized to him, but this wasn't enough for Richard. He sued them both, got his name cleared, and got a big, fat payday from them. Still, Was this enough to fix his damaged reputation? This event shook Richard so much that during it, Richard disappeared from being famous just so he could recover. After he did, Richard performed some more, but now he has given in to something he can't beat: age. 2. His age. He has completely taken a step back from being in the spotlight all the time. Will he return anytime soon?